Anyhow, starting right now. This is, I'm going to read this because basically the information is very important. And I don't want to leave things out. And when I say kind of direct and focus, so let me just begin by starting with this. On the 1st of October, 1946, after 216 court sessions, the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg delivered its verdicts, sentencing the leaders of the Nazi Party to death by hanging. The author of the following account, which is famous, this is well known, this is used in seminars for obvious reasons, as you'll see coming up, God willing. Kingsbury Smith of the International News Service was chosen by lot to represent the American press at the execution of 10 of those leaders. This is what he wrote. It says, Julius Streicher made his melodramatic appearance at 2:12 a.m. While his manacles were being removed and his bare hands bound, this ugly, dwarfish little man, wearing a threadbare suit and a well-known bluish shirt buttoned to the neck, but without a tie, he was notorious during his days of power for his flashy dress, glanced at the 3 wooden scaffolds rising menacingly in front of him. Then he glanced around the room, his eyes resting momentarily upon the small group of witnesses. By this time, his hands were tied securely behind his back. 2 guards, one on each arm, directed him to the number 1 gallows on the left of the entrance. He walked steadily the 6 feet to the first wooden step, but his face was twitching. As the guide stopped at the bottom of the steps for identification formality, he uttered his piercing scream, Hail Hitler. The shriek sent a shiver down my back. As its echo died away, an American colonel standing by the steps said sharply, asked the man his name. In response to the interpreter's query, Streicher shouted, You know my name well. The interpreter repeated his request, and the condemned man yelled, Julius Streicher. As he reached the platform, Streicher called out, Now it goes to God. He was pushed the last 2 steps to the mortal spot beneath the hangman's rope. The rope was held back against the wooden rail by the hangman. Streicher was swung suddenly to face the witnesses and glared at them. Suddenly he screamed, Purim Fest, 1946. And in brackets, it says, to explain, Purim is a Jewish holiday celebrated in the spring, commemorating the execution of Haman, ancient persecutor of the Jews described in the Old Testament. Weird. I mean, it's been said before that our enemies know more about us than many Jews know about themselves. But this is so uncalled for. This is so like outside the box. This man, he's a Nazi. He's been killing Jews for who knows how long and torturing them. And he's about to be killed. And of all the things he's going to yell out, before he dies, he's about to go to meet he's not even going to meet his maker because he doesn't deserve that. He's just going to go poof because, whatever. It's a discussion for Shar Gilgulim. But here it's like why this specifically is the thing that he chooses to say as he's about to go to his death. So of course the Discovery seminars and all kinds of other organizations have used this to try to show the connection that unfortunately the internet is as unstable. Okay, well, do the best we can. Not to do about that. Anyhow, so what was all this about? How did he know? How did he know this? How did he know about Purim? How did he know to call this Purim Fest? It's very, very, very strange, very weird. Okay. And how could such a wretched individual even mention God? And what connection, if any, was he making to the holiday of Purim? The questions, you have to ask. You have to try to understand it. I mean, most people would brush this under the carpet and say, okay, it's strange things happen in history. Here's another strange thing, but significant for sure. I mean, if you believe in hashgacha pratis, if you believe there's no such thing as coincidence, then it's got to mean something, especially given the circumstances, how it all comes out and the whole thing, especially what's coming up right now. Equally intriguing is the 4 different sized letters in the Megillah's listing of the 10 sons of Haman. If you look at most of the Megillahs, a kosher Megillah will have one page where the sons of Haman are written in large letters, and we try to say them all in one breath if we can, to point out the fact that they don't really mean anything, they're insignificant, and they're all written quite large, except that in a couple of the names, that there's a letter that's small. And there's a whole discussion about whether Megillus Esther was written with Ruach HaKodesh or not. The Gemara decides in the end it had to be because they knew things they could, not otherwise known. If it wasn't for Ruach HaKodesh, which means like kind of divine inspiration, a little bit above simply recounting the events from memory. And this will certainly make that point because, these 3 letters, and they are basically a Tav, the letter Tav, and a Shin and a Zayin. They're smaller. Go look at your Megillah. I didn't bring one with me right now, but look at a Megillah and you'll see them written smaller. And actually, one of the letters is above, which is larger. There's 4 letters altogether, 1 larger one and 3 smaller ones. What does that mean? Why did they do that? In the Sefer Torah, we know when we see smaller letters like that, they mean something. The word Vayikra, the very first word of Sefer Vayikra, right, has a small aleph. So it looks like the word Vayikar, as if the aleph is missing. You can see it, but it's small, compared to the other 4 letters. So therefore, we use it for a drush. We elucidate it. And Rashi points out that this is the essential difference between the Jewish people and the nations of the world, because Bilam only got called on by God when God wanted to speak to Bilam, but Moshe was able to approach God whenever he wanted, basically, and that's what the Yikra is, a lashon of closeness, as opposed to the word Yikar comes the word Mikra, which means random, happenstance, chance, whatever, and that's why the aleph is small, and of course the aleph is the aleph missing from Kisei back in Parshat Beshalach, where it's talking about Amalek, right? That Amalek somehow causes the aleph of the word Kisei, the throne of God, to be missing. And of course, that aleph also, as we'll talk about, God willing, in the next weeks coming up, about how aleph is the first letter of the word Adam and represents the soul. It's significant. So therefore, the small little aleph and the word Vayikra come to tell a story. But that's the Torah. And the books of prophets were written by prophets too, so that's kind of like the same thing. But here's Megillus Esther coming along after Torah was given, and it's written by basically Mordechai and Esther, and then Anshe, the Anshe Knesset Gdos and Hedron, people around that time, editing it, going through it, and for some reason, it doesn't say why anywhere. Rashi doesn't point out why. These 3 letters are smaller and 1 letter is bigger. So, of course, the first thing you do is you add up the gematria, but the gematria would mean absolutely nothing until 1946. Until 1946, until the Nuremberg trials, these 3 letters may have meant nothing. Maybe in every generation, someone tried to guess what they meant and found their own meaning. But the war lasted a specific time, began at a certain time, and ended at a certain time, and no one sat down and said, well, what day of the Jewish year should we hold the Nuremberg trials? No one did that. But it happened to be Hoshana Rabbah. In the end, even the number 216, the number of trials they had to get to these conclusions, is significant in Kabbalah, this number. We don't believe in, we believe in coincidence, but not random coincidence. Things overlap and happen at the same time to teach us something. God does it to try and point something out. So when you have these 3 numbers, and it happens to be that 1946 happened to be the Jewish New Year already, because it's Hoshana Rabbah is after Shoshana, so therefore it's no longer 5706, it's 5707, right? And this is the number, the Tav, Shin, and Zayin add up to 707. And the year was 5707. So you're going to say, But that's only 707. What about the 5,000? So the Vav, which is larger than the others, is the number 6. And 5,000, of course, is the 6th millennium. So it's literally like the 4 letters are predicting a date somehow to do with the hanging of Haman's sons who are already hanged at this point in time, right? But the mysterious thing in all of this, which again, anyone who's gone to a discovery seminar or some code seminar, right, will have already seen this before and heard this before, is because you look at the Megillah, and what does the Megillah say? It says, if it pleases the king, let tomorrow also be granted to the Jews to do as today's decree, and let them hang Haman's 10 sons on the gallows. Didn't we just do that? Right? Been there, done that? You're like, what are you talking about? Oh, they can take them all down. They're all dead. Take them all down and rehang them again tomorrow just for the fun of it. Doesn't make sense. I mean, what were they talking about? What were they thinking about? Even more interesting, right, was that 10 people were hanged in Nuremberg, but there originally were 11. There were supposed to be 11, which is also significant, by the way. But what happened to the 11th? Somehow, I believe someone smuggled something into his cell, and he was able, Hermann Goering, the coward, right, was able to commit suicide before this, and as a result of it, only 10 people went to the gallows, which at that time of history was an unusual way to kill somebody. It's not like the 1800s, where that was one of the main ways, with the guillotine or hanging. We have other ways of doing it today. Firing squad, that's a good one. But that's what happened. They're hanged. And Esther makes this hint. And in the Megillah, by these words, where she's saying this, you got the number built in that happens to coincide with Hoshana Rabbah and with the Nuremberg. It's like unbelievable. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And he didn't stand up and say Hanukkah fest or Passover fest, or he said Purim fest, 1946. What did he mean? What did he know? And why did he care? And why would he even give that at the end like that? No explanations. All people want to say is that the Megillah knew. The authors of the Megillah knew. But let me ask you a question. They knew. So why didn't they tell us? If they knew that down the road there was going to be a reason to hang 10 more sons of Haman, which would almost indicate that these are Gilgulim, reincarnations of these 10 sons, and some catastrophic event will take place in the future, like the one that they almost experienced in the time of Haman, why didn't they pass that down as a Masorah? Well, maybe they did, but we forgot about it. But how do you forget about that, How do you forget about the fact that it might be a Holocaust sometime in the future? And if they didn't know, then why'd they do it? What were they building in by putting these letters small? That's the question, okay? There's a lot to say about Purim. So traditionally, and we spoke about it before, right? Purim was Kabbalah Torah Part 2, the acceptance of Torah Part 2. And why? Because we mentioned earlier that the Jewish people only said Nasa v'nishma to the written law. The written law was not as detailed, not as complex, right? But the Jewish people, they heard about Torah Shebal Peh. They said, whoa, wait a second. Now, this is the fine print we were warned about, and we didn't sign on, for that. So God says, well, here's the mountain over your head. If you accept it, great. If not, then here's where I bury you, under the mountain. So we did. We were compelled to accept it. But, says the Gemara, over 1,000 years later, if the exact number, but by Purim time, the nace, the miracle that took place that saved the Jewish people, so inspired them that they were finally able to do what their ancestors were not able to do, and that was receive Torah b'simcha, the oral law this time. So Purim really is a holiday about Torah Shebal Peh, the oral law. Okay, so Naseh b'nishma, right, which literally means we will do and we will understand, actually means nun aseh and nun shma, because the first letter of the word Naseh is nun, but you can break it up into the nun. And the reason why we said this is so important is because the Nun Shari Bina, the 50 gates of understanding, to go back to the previous sessions, or you have to buy the book Redemption to Redemption. And I wrote the book, so obviously I'm going to promote it anyhow. But I recommend that you do look at it, and read it, because it goes into a lot of detail and a lot of information, background to what we're talking about here, in case it gets confusing. Because there's only so much you can say in the course of an hour, in a couple hours. But the book goes into a lot of detail. So it's called Redemption to Redemption. It's available through Amazon. It's available through our site, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is that the 50 represents a certain level of divine wisdom from the sphere called Bina, and it's the basis of Torah, it's the basis of life, the basis of creation. And when you're learning Torah, that's what you're accessing. And the more sincere and the deeper you go, the more you access it. 50 gates of understanding. They're like a ladder. You go higher and higher, get closer to God. That's the idea. And Purim was a time of a tremendous emanation of this light. And apparently, according to the commentators, that Haman, who's from Amalek, sensed this potential emanation of divine light for the basis of receiving the oral law, the Simcha, and he wanted to block it. How do you block it? So if you want to accentuate something spiritually, then you kind of mimic it. Right? Or you do something that promotes that particular thing, that promotes the Nun Shari Bina. If you want to stop something, for example, something impure is taking place, then you do something pure to counteract it. And likewise, the evil people will try to do something impure to counteract the pure. So what did Haman do? He knew that Mordechai was the point man. He knew that Mordechai, because of his prominence in the Sanhedrin and his prominence in the whole Purim story, that he was going to be the one through whom this light would come into the world. It would come through his mouth. He would speak and give over the Torah in that time. So in order to stop it, Haman built his eitz, doesn't even say gal, eitz, tree, right? As an eitz of dust of Aram, right? He built his eitz, how high? 50 amas high. Why? Well, not to show off the death of Mordechai, because as the Gemara points out, you can't really see higher than 20. 20 amas is like 40 feet. That's 4-story building. 50 amas is 100. It's like it's a 10-story building. You hang someone for the 10th story, maybe you'll see something dangling up there, but you won't know who it is. So certainly that's not going to make a big show of the death of Mordechai, unless you're going to have closed circuit TV up there, and zoom it down to the ground below and all that, like they do today. But that wasn't going on over here. That wasn't the point. That was Haman's point. But thank you, for building it so high, because of that we could hang 10 sons one after the other in the end. But he built that gallows 50 amas high in order to counteract the Nun Shari Bina, the 50 gates of understanding that were coming to the world at that time. And Mordechai knew this, and he wanted to stop it. So that's what he was doing. He was trying to counteract it with an impure version of the 50, which he built into his gallows. I mean, you read the story, it's like, this guy's an idiot. What does he know? It's like, how did he get so far? Achashverosh, he's like, no, these people were smart people. They knew a lot, probably a lot more than a lot of people know today. And they knew how the spiritual world worked. And even though they were so evil, they believed in God. That's the power of chutzpah. That's the power of arrogance. Bilam talked to God. He talked to God, and he still went ahead. We're all going, how do you do that? How do you do that? How do you get on your donkey and go to curse the Jewish people after God said, don't do it? Well, how did Adam eat from the tree of knowledge? Well, that's a little bit different already. But how does Bilam do it? That's arrogance. Arrogance, it's amazing. It's amazing how arrogance will blind a person to the truth and allow them to convince themselves to do something that really anybody else without that arrogance, or at least with a little objectivity, would say, what are you doing? That's the power. That's the negative power of arrogance. So when the Jewish people said Nasav and Nishma back at Mount Sinai, they were basically saying that we will do the Nun Shari Bina and we will understand it after. That's our commitment to do exactly that. So for what? What's the end game? Just to become more knowledgeable? Is that the goal? Is that what we're trying? Yeah, 100%. There's no question about that. Because listen, like anyone else in life, the more you know them, if they're a nice person, the more you're going to love them. The more you know them, you don't like them, means they're not a nice person. But certainly with God, as the Rambam points out, to know God is to love God. The more you know about him, the more you're going to love him. So certainly just gaining more knowledge in Torah and deeper understanding should ultimately result in love of God. But there's more. There's something else. There's an even greater end game to the life of a Jew than simply accumulating knowledge and developing that relationship to love God. In fact, it's the ultimate expression of the love of God comes actually from the following thing. This is a verse or verses from Yeshaya, the prophet Isaiah, right, who says the following thing on behalf of God. And I placed my words into your mouth. This is what God's saying through Yeshaya to the Jewish people. And with the shadow of my hand, I covered you to plant the heavens and to found the earth and to say to Zion that you are my people. Okay, everything else makes perfect sense, but what's this first part? I placed my words into your mouth. Are these my words? Am I speaking? Or is this God speaking? Halavai, it's God speaking through me. That's a great, tremendous merit. But this it sums up the Jewish people. This is what I'm saying. You're my people. I place my words to your mouth. Furthermore, a little bit later, it says a similar thing. And we actually say this in davening every morning. It's called Uva L'Tzion, right towards the end of davening. Depends upon your nusach, Sephardi, Ashkenaz, but Ashkenazim say right before Aleinu and right after Lametzeach. And the prayer Lametzeach, right before Uva L'Tzion, has 70 words, as the Vilna Gaon points out, because 70, now, first of all, we are in Babylonia. The whole Purim story is based upon this number 70, as we'll see, right? Or we won't, but it is. And the gematria of Gog and Magog is 70, and that's the threshold to the final redemption. So he says we place that there because what comes right after it are these words, Uva L'Tzion. And the Redeemer shall come to Zion and to those who repent of transgression in Yaakov. This is English. The Hebrew is more recognizable. God says, as for me, this is my covenant with them. This is my covenant. Now, the Gemara, the Talmud says in Gittin that God's covenant with the Jewish people was made specifically for Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law, which, for those who are unaware, is basically the Mishnah, the Talmud, and the Midrashim, and all those other aspects that are part of Torah, but not specifically written down in the 5 books of Moshe. They're in there, alluded to, hinted to, and it's all the basis of the explanation, but it's part of this large body of knowledge called the oral law that everybody else has contested. Anybody who's not Orthodox, basically, is because they've contested the authenticity of the oral law. And the Talmud is what's learned in yeshivas around the world to this very day. It has been out for thousands of years. And it's only, and even though it was written down in 500 CE, but it's really basically the discussions in the Beis Medrash have gone on since Moshe Rabbeinu received Torah from God on Mount Sinai, and then recorded eventually when we started to get persecuted. So that's what the Gemara says. For that body of knowledge, for the 5 books of Moses, and there's no question about that is the basis of Judaism and world knowledge. But it's what makes it unique, and especially unique, is this thing called the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. And God says, I make my covenant with them, my spirit, which is upon you, okay, and my words, again, that I've placed in your mouth. It's a big theme over here. It's a big theme in Yeshaya. He keeps coming back and saying the same thing. My words, which I've placed in your mouth, shall not move from your mouth or from the mouth of your seed, and from the mouth of your seed, said God, from now and to eternity. That's what Yeshaya says. Okay. So we know, and we've spoken about this idea of das. Purim is about das. Das just, technically means knowledge. But when we talk about das, especially in Kabbalah, first of all, it's a sphera. It's one of the spiritual emanations through which God allows his light to flow down to us. But Eita das tovara, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But das specifically in this particular context might better be called das Elokim, because it's not just any knowledge. Knowledge has 2 aspects to it: panemius and chitzonius. Right? Panemius is the knowledge that directly talks about God, that gives you an understanding of who God is as much as humanly possible, and allows you to be on the same page as God, and therefore to be a partner in the fulfillment of creation. Nothing better, nothing bigger, nothing more rewarding than that. Everybody else is confused. Everybody else is off in some different direction with some das, but it's not the right one. The point of getting this das is to be able to know the truth. And that's what Torah comes to give to us. So the das is really what flows through the 50 gates of understanding. This light comes down from God, is filtered down through something, and Kabbalah actually explains what these things actually are. It's not like they're physical gates in any way, but a gate means something. But the light comes down, filtered through the Nun Shari Bina, the 50 gates of understanding. For the person who accesses them, which is what Purim is trying to give to us, that gets this thing called das. This understanding, this clarity, which of course is the opposite of Amalek. Amalek represents complete confusion about the truth of life, and das is the counterpart, the opposite. So that's why there's positive das and negative das. Eitz das tov ra, a tree of knowledge of good and evil, which means that there's das tov and das ra, good das, good knowledge, productive knowledge, and negative knowledge, which steers you away from the truth and allows a person to waste their life, to go through life smiling the entire time. I'm having a blast, but not doing things so meaningful, not earning my portion of what to come. That's called negative das in the end. It's really Yaakov's perspective versus Esau's perspective, which unbelievably basically makes up, about 98.8% of the world's population for the last 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years. What reason for the flood in the end, and all the world wars have taken place, and all the confusion, and even coronavirus. You want to pin it on something? It has to do with the das, because God runs the world, and we wouldn't have it if everybody was buying into God's perspective. If everybody had this level of das that Purim comes to give to us, then we wouldn't need things like that. We have the crises we do in history and life in order to inspire us to make changes that somehow promotes the getting of this das. That's what we're after. That's what a person's supposed to be after when they learn Chumash, and then they learn Mishnah, and if they happen to learn Gemara and Medrash, and whatever you're learning. It's not just learning for the sake of learning. You're after this thing called das. That's what you want. And what does Shlomo Melech say? He says, if you pursue it, this is in Mishlei, Proverbs, right? If you pursue this das like you would money, money, people will they'll climb the Himalayas for money if they have to. Right? They'll go into outer space to get money. Where, the ends of the earth, the other side of the rainbow, whatever it takes to get that pot of gold, right? And buried treasures, same thing, right? People, get on a ship or on a boat, go, to find a buried treasure. If you pursue it like that, he says, then das Elokim, you will get. You'll get that. You'll end up with that in the end. But if you don't, if it doesn't interest you, if you're not driven to get it, you might become smarter. Technically smart. And you see this a lot of people. A lot of people can spew back halacha and gemaras and quote this thing and quote that thing and that and that. But at the end of the day, there's something missing, right? And we'll see what that thing is in the end. And the most amazing thing is it's right in front of our face, right there. There's two ways to hide something. You can hide something by basically hiding it, putting it under the pillow or bury it in the ground and out of eyesight so no one can find it. Or you can make it so obvious that people are looking right at it and they still can't see it. Well, it turns out that the latter, is true in this case. So, we need to know what it's all about, what we're trying to achieve, what we're trying to get. And what's this whole point about drinking adelo yada, the word, da, das, they're related, it's knowledge, until you don't know the point anymore between the bad guys and the good guys? Why? Why must I get to that point? Why isn't that better? I know who the bad guys are and the good guys are, so I can stay away from the bad guys or get rid of them if I have to, and hang out with the good guys and be, don't hang out with so and so, right? He's a bad influence. He'll drag you down, right? And this guy, he's a good guy. Make friends with him. Isn't it? I should know the difference, and I should drink to the point where I don't. I do know the difference right now. Right now, I'm aware of the difference, which is a good thing normally. And now I have to go get drunk on Purim, which is a holiday of das, of awareness. And now I have to go lose that awareness in order to be able to not know the difference between the good guy and the bad guys. What the? I don't know. If you don't find this strange and weird, then nothing is. You have to solve it. First, you have to solve it for two reasons. One, if you want to know what life is about, we're doing here, you have to understand this. This is life itself. Second of all, is that if you don't, basically, then you're just going to fall into the trap that billions have over the years, over the millennia, that ultimately leads, God forbid, to the worst of situations, because God is insistent we get this level of dust, and he does everything he can to try to promote it. Okay, so, let's go on, let's continue. So it says the following thing. Well, it says it because I actually wrote it. The answer to all this and to so much more is right there in front of us. Yes, it is hidden from us, not by coverings, but by the lack of them. It is an answer so obvious and in clear view that it eludes us. It is not intellectual confusion that Amalek promulgates, but emotional confusion. It's not our minds he tries to steal, but our hearts, the kelev that he is. A kelev is a dog. Amalek is a dog. He's called a kelev. Oh, why? I mean, don't worry, I love dogs. and there's two aspects of dogs. There's a good side and there's a negative side. Because in Kedusha and in Kabbalah, there's always two aspects. For example, there are three main klipas, three main negative traits, if you will, in life. One is called gaiva, right? One is called taiva, and one is called arrogance. Basically, is azus panim. So a shore is an ox. An ox is a big, bully animal, very strong, very bold, very not afraid of anybody, basically. So we see there's two aspects to the shore. The shore, can be representative of Yosef. Yosef is called the shore in the Bruchas of Yaakov, in Parshas V'yechi. He represents the shore represents him. Fertility, all these different things, Russia brings it down. But the shore also can represent Esav. He's also called the shore, but from the side of impurity. So that's why Yosef and Esav are counterparts. When Yosef was born, that's when Yaakov knew he could go home and confront his brother Esav, because Yosef was alive. He's the shore on the side of holiness to counteract the shore, the ox, on the side of impurity. Likewise is the chamor. A chamor is a donkey. So Yissachar is also called a donkey. He's one of the 12 tribes. And Yissachar is the one who learns so much Torah. A donkey is a beast of burden. They don't do much other than carry stuff. So Yissachar carries the oil of Torah for the Jewish people. He learns and he teaches, and that's what so therefore that's the chamor on the side of Kedusha. When Mashiach comes, he'll be riding a donkey, the same donkey that Avraham rode to do the Akedah, and that Moshe used to go down to Mitzrayim. Very old donkey. But there's a side of negativity as well. There's also impurity. So that's the Arab world. They correspond because the word chamor is like the word chumris, which means physicality, materialism. So that's the negative side as well. So Kabbalah, the Zohar points out that the third one kind of emerges from the two of them. There's a combination. It's from the inside, the essence of both of them emerges a third one, which is the kelev. So if you take the middle letter of the word shor, which is a vav, and the middle letters of the word chamor, which is a mem and a vav, right? And you mem and a vav, and you add them up together, it's the gematria of the word kelev, chof lamed beis, and that's supposed to be the arrogance that Amalek represents. Amalek is, he knows that God's right there, the clouds of glory are right there. The Jewish people just conquered Egypt, that the 10 plagues split the sea, months falling from the sky. Everyone knows that, and he still attacks the Jewish people, like Bilam. But Bilam comes anyhow from Amalek, and Balak too. And that's Amalekian arrogance. You can actually go ahead and do such a dumb thing, but totally destructive. Kill yourself, but just for the sake of doing it. That's the idea of kelev. But the word kelev also is the word kalev, which means like a heart. Amalek doesn't mind if you learn Torah. He doesn't mind if you become smarter. He doesn't mind if you're even aware of what he does. You see, I'm talking about it. You talk about it. The whole world can talk about it. What he doesn't like is when it makes it down to the heart. That knowledge makes it down to the heart. What's the difference? So the Medrash says on the verse says that no prophet ever rose up amongst the Jewish people like Moshe Rabbeinu. No prophet ever. He's the prophet of prophets, the father of prophets, he's called. And the Medrash comes along and says a really interesting thing. Aha! We can be medayik, we can be exact in the wording. The verse says that no one amongst the Jews, it didn't say no one amongst the whole world, it says no one amongst the Jewish people ever rose up to be a prophet like Moshe Rabbeinu. But amongst the nations of the world, yes, someone has risen up who is as great as Moshe Rabbeinu amongst the nations of the world. That's what the Medrash starts out. And we're all going, whoa, okay, who, what, where, when, you know? And the Medrash in their hand, who was that? Bilam HaRasha, the evil Bilam. And why did God give them Bilam like that? Because when the nations of the world later on Yom Adin, the day of judgment, they come to God and they say to God, wait a second, they had the prophet Moshe Rabbeinu, the great, great, great teacher, and the greatest prophet that ever lived. And that's why they kept Torah. If you had given us a prophet like Moshe Rabbeinu, we too would have learned Torah and be worthy of the world to come. So, low fair, right? It's not fair. So God comes back and says, no, I give you a prophet. I give you a great prophet. I give you a prophet as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. Who was that? Bilam. What? Bilam? Are you kidding me? That guy? That nutcase? That evil sorcerer? That's our prophet, the one that... How many times have I read and sat through a drush that has taken on this medrash to try to explain to us what the medrash actually means? Because everybody, and even Bilam himself, would have to agree, if he was honest, that he never came close to Moshe Rabbeinu. Never. So the nations of the world could come back and say, I'm sorry, God, it doesn't work. It doesn't wash with us. You can't pull the wool over our eyes. We never had a Moshe Rabbeinu. We had a Bilam, and Bilam was a useless, whatever he was. And they try to, we want our money back, or at least a second chance. They actually asked for the second chance, and God actually gives them a second chance in the end. But don't tell me Bilam and Moshe were equal prophets. So the priest Hadek explains, yeah. In terms of knowledge, Bilam himself says he knew Das Elyon. He knew the knowledge of the Almighty. He knew what God was thinking. In fact, the Gemara says that he could do something that no one else could do. And that was figured at the moment of the day that God gets angry and curse the Jewish people at that moment in time and be successful. And God actually suspended his schedule that day to stop Bilam from being successful. So yeah, Bilam, he was a great prophet. So why was he so evil in the end? And the Pri Tzaddik explains, because this is remitted down to here. That was the fundamental difference. Moshe, he knew it all up here, but it went down to his heart. And the moment it connects up the two of them, they're connected, they're unified in the end, you become a tzaddik, you become righteous. How many of us are walking around with this much knowledge, but our lives make it look as if we're only having this much knowledge because of the inconsistency, because we don't live up to what we know, because we don't take it doesn't register in the heart, the head level completely, on the heart level not so much. And that's the point of das, because the Zohar calls das, this knowledge thing, the special thing called das. Get used to the word; it's really important. In Kabbalah, we're always talking about it. Right? This word das is called the koich achibur. It's called the power of unifying, of unification. When you have das, you can unify. The Jewish people lack achdus. They lack national unity because of a lack of das. The world's at arms, they're fighting with each other because of a lack of das. The heart and the mind, and the mind and the heart, right? Got it back. The mind and the heart, not connected, not fully connected. A lack of das. Das is the koich hachibur. And that's why Amalek attacks it. The gematria of Amalek is Safek, which means doubt, but not intellectual doubt, the doubt you feel in your heart. I'm always amazed. Speak for myself personally, how I'll give a shir like this, and I'll talk about bitachon and emunah, and I'll be, and I'll support other people, and I'll give them all kinds of inspiration, and give them all kinds of chizuk and all that, and then I'll go, to catch the bus, and the bus at least 15 seconds before I get there, and I'm going to be late for my next appointment, and I'm all of a sudden thinking, where's God when I need him? All of a sudden, like great bal bitachon, great emunah. How quickly we become, or we start to fear things. We know God runs the world. We know that God's behind everything. It says in the Shema, it says in Nefesh HaChaim, he's the Bala Koyches. There's not a single Koyach in the world that can operate. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad means nothing lifts a finger, the Gemara says. You can't bang your finger. You can't break a fingernail. You can't scratch your face. You can't do anything if it's not nigzar in Shemaim. Small, big, medium, it doesn't make a difference. It's right there. That's our hashkafa. Chanina Mendoza, the Gemara says, a witch falls at his feet to curse him, right? She falls, and he says, Ein od milvado. There's none other than God. So Rashi says, don't think he's saying that you're gonna have no effect on me. He's not saying that. You might have an effect on me. Maybe your curse will fall on me and I will be affected by it. But don't think for 1 second it's because you cursed me. It's because God did, for whatever reason, for whatever good reason he's doing it, and you're the vehicle to do it. But I have no belief in you as a person, source of power. And he was real with that. And that's why he was unaffected by these things in the end. Because he knew something very, very special that Purim comes to teach us. And it's really what we're trying to achieve through the drinking and all that, because this is what it says. Gemara says in Erevin, Rabbi Chanina, right, this person with this fantastic this bitachon, says anyone who becomes appeased, the actual lashon is yishuv das, which means a settled das. That's the language. The das is miyushav. It's settled. It's relaxed. They become settled through their wine. Has the das, right, of his creator. Because I drank it, I'm all nice and quiet and calm and relaxed. That gives me the dust of my creator. Rabbi Chia said, anyone whose mind becomes settled, again, yeshiva das, so the wine has the das of the 70 elders. Okay, 70, there's a number again. Because the numerical value of wine is 70, yain is yud yud nun, 10, 10, 50, right? Which is 70, right? And the numerical value of the word secret, as Rashi points out, a sod in Hebrew is 70. And Gemara concludes by saying, when wine goes in, secrets go out. Huh? What does it do with anything? It's like, why is that the concluding line? And anyhow, what does it mean that they're equal? Because just because the same numerical value, the same gematria in the end, that's what it says. It's either Yishuv Das. So it says, Kabbalah explains, there are 32 paths of Chachma, what's called the Lamed base, the Sivas Chachma. It's actually what gives rise to the Nun Shari Bina. But the Gematria Lamed base, of course, is the word Leif. And the Mizbeach, the altar, where we basically brought animals up in place of ourselves, what we're really offering on the Mizbeach, of course, is our heart. And the basis, the base of the Mizbeach is 32 by 32, which is Lamed base by Lamed base, which, of course, is the word heart once again. Ever see how the Tefillin Shel Yad looks like the Mizbeach? It's built like the Mizbeach, a base of the thing that comes up and like this, is placed opposite the heart. Because that's what God's after. In last week's Parsha, in Parsha's Truma, God says, bring me a Truma, an Nedavas Halev, which technically means a free will offering. Nedavas Halev means what you feel like giving. There are three offerings brought in last week's Parsha, or mentioned in last week's Parsha. 2 were obligatory, the half shekel and another half shekel for the sake of building the base of the Mishkan, but one of them was voluntary. You brought what you felt like bringing, but you gave what you felt like giving. But the actual lashon is the Davos Alev. You literally translate the words as a offering, a gift of the heart. God's building the Mishkan with hearts, not with minds. I mean, the minds will be involved anyhow, but the verses say that God gave them the das. He put it into their heads. He gave them Ruach HaKodesh how to build the Mishkan. But what he didn't give to us was the heart. That we had to give to him instead. Because a whole tug of war and the whole battle with Amalek, with Haman, with Hitler, Yamach Shmo B'zichro, and Julius Streicher, and all the other Nazis that did what? What was the whole goal? After the heart, to instill this tremendous fear. That's what Paro did, by the way. It says that Paro imposed avodah b'far. They worked avodah b'far. What does it mean b'far? B'perach, with a soft mouth. So there's different interpretations. One means that basically he connived and he convinced them that they were going to be doing things for the state, and then in the end he made them into slaves and all that. He deluded them. But the Medrash says what it means was the whole point was to make them so tired at the end of the day they would not have any koyach left to speak Torah. That's what Paro was after. That's what the hard work is all about. You get to a point you just don't feel like why is that so important? Because you can open a chumash anytime and read and learn the parsha and say the words. I can't tell you how many times I got up in the morning to learn the parsha, read the psukim, and didn't remember what I read from 3 psukim ago that goes in and goes out. But Torah Shebal Peh, to speak the words, to be a mouthpiece on behalf of God, to be a vehicle in order to be able, that God should be able to speak through me, that takes focus. That takes a love of God and a love of Torah. So it says, the Vilna Gaon brings down that the war against Amalek has 3 levels. And one, he says, the first one is Amalek of the heart. Getting rid of Amalek from the heart. That's where he does his battle. To create a sense of inconsistency. To detach the heart from the mind. And that inconsistency is all over the place at all times. And as long as it is, we can't be real with the real reality. Because when the heart finally understands what the head already knows, that there's no enemy, only God. Listen to what the verse says. The pasuk itself says, you have been shown in order to know that God, he is God, there is none else besides him. That's the intellectual aspect. That's what God tells. Do you know what it means? It says to drink until you don't know any more between Ar Haman and Baruch Mordechai. It doesn't mean you're drunk to the point of unconsciousness. It doesn't mean you're so drunk you're throwing up, you can't even think about anybody, good, bad anymore. It means you've gotten to such a level of awareness that God is behind everything. The only source of power in the world is God himself. That there's no such thing as an enemy in the end. I'll say something that's going to be very controversial for the person who doesn't think it through. But come on, coronavirus, the enemies of the Jewish people, the anti-Semites, come on, these things have power of their own. They're real. They're real, 100%. There's not, God made them real. But make no mistake about it. There's nothing random about it. It doesn't make a difference who's involved. Either you believe, you don't. The verse says, I'll say it again, okay? You have been shown in order to know that God, he is God. There's none else besides him. Ein od milvado. Everybody knows this. Even the people who don't. We all know it. And even the deniers, they know this. But the difference is how many people have this in their heart. How many arguments you get in over something, like the virus, for example, who people talk about it like it's an independent enemy, or the enemies of the Jewish people, or the anti-Semites, or the Democrats, and they give these people power. And we instill it. And you know what? Because we do, they have it. Because we give it to them, they have it. And once they have it, watch out. Because then they'll come after us. That's what Amalek did. Amalek didn't exist. They weren't on the map. They're just a nomadic people until the Jewish people did what? They let their hearts go. They have no water for 3 days. And they asked the question, Rashi says, is God amongst us or not? That's a hard question. Because the head was saying, what are you, an idiot? What are you, an idiot? Really? Come on, look. Clouds of glory surrounding the camp. Man falling from the sky. Did you not witness the splitting of the sea just a couple of days ago? Did you not just witness the destruction of Egypt through 10 incredible, awesome plagues? And you're asking that question? Are you serious? Well, but they panicked. If their hearts had been lined up with their heads, they would have done what anybody else whose heart is lined up with their head, they would have come along and said, Moshe Rabbeinu, please, with all due respect, we got kids, we know that God's looking out for us. Everything is good. We just have this question mark, So what's with the water? When might we expect it? In fact, we do expect it, and we can't wait to see how God's going to bring it. So how? No Amalek. But instead, they left what's up here, and their hearts spoke, because it's just anyhow, short time out of Egypt, there's still slave mentality, and they panicked. And they acted contrary to their knowledge. And God says, I showed you, so you should know. Now put that in your heart. That's your job. I gave you the knowledge, I gave you the dust, now put that in your heart. God says, I am God, your God, who raised you from the land of Egypt. I brought you up from the land of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is Meitzer Yam, constriction of the 50, constriction of the fifth, the Nun Shari Bina. It's a place you can't learn Torah. You can't be connected. Your heart and mind, that's what Paro's doing. He's pulling it apart. But I took you out of there. You're no longer there anymore. And why? Open your mouth wide and I will fill it with food. That's, fill my mouth with food. We have food. Still got matzahs left over. And they get the man and all that. With what? With das. And you should speak Torah. So this basically, right, is really what, the whole point of Purim is all about. This is what Purim comes to try to do, to give us back the heart. The whole point of Purim, all the 4 mitzvahs, which we spoke about, and how they correspond to the Mishkan, and you go from level to level to level, is basically just to bring the heart and mind back together. Now, of course, if you don't have the das yet, go get that. But you want to hear the most amazing thing. This is the most powerfully amazing thing there is. In fact, I saw a few sources like this recently, but they're all over the place. Yosef is in jail in Mitzrayim. And tomorrow he's going to be taken out and brought before Paro. Because Paro has his dreams. The wine steward was forced against his will to reveal that Yosef is a dream interpreter. And tomorrow he's going to come into jail, stand before Paro, and have to prove himself worthy of being taken out of jail and leading Egypt. And Paro knows 70 languages. It's a big thing in those days. 70 nations, 70 languages. And Yosef doesn't. He knows Hebrew, probably a little bit of Egyptian at that time, but not the 70 languages. But by tomorrow, when he comes out, he knows them all. 71, in fact. Hebrew is the 71st. It incorporates all the other 70. And he knew one more than Paro. And that gave him tremendous leverage until the day he died. Where did he get that knowledge from? So it says, the night before, Gabriel came down and taught him all the languages. Literally word by word? No, he just went into him. In Parshas Bahalosecha, Moshe says, I cannot run this nation by myself. They're going to kill me, they're going to stone me. I've had enough of this already. God says, fine. Choose 70 elders. Right? Choose 7. The number keeps popping up. I got to tell you, there's just so much more I'm not telling you that the book goes into, but it's so important to understand it. But he chooses these people, right? And all of a sudden, they're the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin has to know 70 languages. Part of the qualifications to be on the Sanhedrin, you had to know all the 70 nations, languages of the world plus Hebrew, of course, right? Because you can't have an interpreter. You have to hear the information for yourself and understand it. And these people didn't have that knowledge. Not just that, but then there's all the halachas, all the Torah knowledge you have to know to be on the Supreme Court of the Torah. So how'd they do that? overnight. Poof, poof. I just put it right into them. Poof, just like all of a sudden. Can you imagine that? Just all of a sudden, there's all this knowledge filling you up. Why? So Rashi says that these people were those people back in Egypt that when Paro said, increase the slavery by making them work, produce a same amount of bricks, but don't give them the straw. And if they don't meet the quota, they're going to get beaten. And these people instead took the beating on behalf of their brothers by taking responsibility for the lack of fulfillment of the quota. And because they saved their brothers and they had that sensitivity, that sympathy and empathy, they had the schus later on to be in the Sanhedrin and get all this fantastic knowledge. Oh, what I wouldn't give to have a burst of knowledge like that. But we all get it a little bit here and there because their hearts were into it. So that's the most amazing thing. If you're going to approach it from a cerebral point that you're not prepared to give your heart over to God, you're going to leave it, in the world that you came from. You're going to leave it hooked up to things that are not really relevant to that relationship with God, or not directly relevant. Then you're going to have to work for what you achieve. You have to accumulate the knowledge yourself, and not just the knowledge, but the understanding of it. Because the Gemara says memory of Torah and things like it's siyata d'shmaya, it's heavenly help. But if your heart's not going to be devoted to God on all levels, you're going to be afraid of people, afraid of consequences. You're going to allow things to affect you emotionally and drag you away from God, that contradict your understanding how God runs the world. If you're going to allow that to happen, and you want to grow in Torah mitzvahs, fine, keep growing. That's always encouraged. But you're going to have to work for the results. But for the person who goes ahead and says, God, I don't know that much. I just know one thing though. It's yours. It's yours. And if I don't want to give it to you, I want to give it to you. And if I don't want to give it to you, I want to give it to you. But somewhere in there's a want that says that's where it belongs. Then God says, I will bless you with das. I will give you knowledge beyond your learning, beyond your understanding. Because you are a kli, you are a vessel, you are a container. And everybody else on the outside says, well, that guy, what can he possibly know? He hasn't put the time in yet. He hasn't learned as much as the other person has. Because for that person, it's all accumulative. Because you turned the pages and you saw the information. But Torah says, yeah, but there's a level higher than that. Nevi'im, prophets, knew so much, but not because they earned it. Not least from learning. They earned it through the heart because they were devoted to Hashem. Their minds and their hearts were connected. And therefore, Amalek is pushed out. That is what I think is what Purim Fest 1946 came to tell us. And the 10 sons and what Esther and Mordechai built into the Megillah, whether they knew it in advance it was going to happen, or simply Ruach HaKodesh or Kodesh Baruch Hu told them to do it, or they had another reason for doing it, not knowing that in the future there'll be this reason. But I think it falls into this category of understanding ideas, which we have addressed before in the past in different contexts, and applies here as well. We know, and it's brought down, that everything that we do in this world, of course, is with help from God. God gives us the ability to be able to accomplish what we have to accomplish on a daily level, on a personal level, on a national level. So, for example, if we have to do a thing called kibbutz galuyos, he'll give us the energy. He'll give us the knowledge. He'll give us the resources. You ever find how that works sometimes in life? Where until you needed the resources, they didn't show up, but also you need them, boom, they happen to show up. That's God. God, oh, now you're ready to work. I'll give you what you need. So whatever we need to accomplish in the world, God will give it to us. That's his promise. That's what he tries to do on our behalf. And there's many times where there's a schedule. For example, redemption has to come. We said in 1948. We got the state back against all the odds in 1948. And not because a bunch of Zionists came back and decided to have a communist system and set up kibbutzim. It should have failed, it could have failed, and would have failed if God had not determined that 1948 was the time for the Jewish people to come back to their land. It had to happen, going back to Maaseh Bereshis. It is an interesting fact that Avram was born in 1948 in the Jewish year, and then 1948, that is interesting. I don't know if it's a connection in any way, but, as we said before, there's no such thing as coincidence. But that was the year. And how do we know that was the year? Because it happened. It doesn't happen accidentally. And then all the miracles that make it happen, an existential war against all the odds. The British give all the weapons to the Arabs on the way out and tie the hands of the Jewish people. You can't even bring them in. We have to smuggle them in, and we fight against 8 nations at one time and we survive it. That's a proof. And then all the success after that, proof. The hand of God, miracle to miracle, that's God for sure. And to accomplish that, we need a thing called Kibbutz Galius. The Vilna Gaon spoke about this back in the 1800s. Started to promote it. His Talmud, he was the first one when to come here when it was a barren land, basically, and begin the rebuilding of the Yishuv back at the end of the 1700s and early 1800s. And that's the beginning of the waves of Aliyah that just got bigger and bigger as time went on. We can't do that on our own. We need God's help. He helps us with that. And certainly, if 1948 is the actual time we officially get the state back, agreed to by the nations of the world, which the Vilna Gaon says can only happen, that's the only way it can happen if we don't merit to go the other way, that they have to agree to it, another miracle, then we can assume that that's the time for the major kibbutz goes, because that's what has been going on for the last 70, 80 years. But what happens if you don't use it? What happens if that koyach comes into the world and you don't use it? Does it just go back to Shemayim? No. Kabbalah says it stays in the world, but it gets taken by our enemies and used against us. And all of a sudden, we got this madman, head of a country where all these Jews are living, actually not even that many Jews compared to the rest of Europe, who decides to do kibbutz galius on them, to concentrate them, to pull them from the 4 corners of Europe to concentration camps. And achdus, unity, absolutely crucial for redemption. But we're not doing it. On the contrary, we're doing the opposite. His beard's longer. He's got shorter payas. He's wearing a business suit. This guy's at university. He's like, so what does God do? Takes it all away. It's all gone. Everybody looks exactly the same, doing the exact same thing, wearing the same stripes, uniform. And you're more important, I'm more important, she's more important, he's more important. Which Jew's more important? God says, you're all important to me. Just like in Parshas B'Midbar, where it says that God numbers his people. Now, that koyach was meant to be used in a redemptive way, but we didn't use it. So the koyach instead goes to the enemy. And Purim, it comes along to unify the hearts and the minds of the Jewish people, to tell us that Ein Od Milvado, he runs the world. Be consistent. Learn it, or at least want it, and make it real in your heart, like we say it Aleinu every single day. And you'll never have to face an enemy again. We don't do that. We don't get rid of our biases. We don't pursue the das. We don't get the nun shar bina. We talk with our own mouths, our own words. God wants to have his light flow through us and put his word in our mouth, and it can't get there because our words are filling it up. Our thoughts are blocking it out because we have all of our biases in our hearts, So that word instead goes to the enemy. Instead of us being able to say, Purim Fest 1946 like we should, the enemy says it instead. Does he know what he's saying? It doesn't make a difference. Does he care? Doesn't make a difference. Does he understand? Doesn't make a difference. It says God puts the words into our mouths. If we use that koyach on our own, if we raise the bar, and I don't mean the one that serves drinks, okay? If we raise the bar spiritually and allow ourselves to get that dust, to clear ourselves out, to unify our hearts and our minds, to become consistent with this idea of Ein Od Milvado. Not only will we not be bothered by enemies of any sort, and be able to rise to a higher level, but we'll have that ultimate fulfillment of the covenant that God made with the Jewish people. That's the source of our own personal fulfillment, to be God's mouthpiece in this world, that he can talk through us, that he can place his words in our mouths to speak on his behalf, because that is the way you earn a reward in the world to come on the most ultimate level possible. It's a big merit. It's only part of the story. There's more information, there's a lot of details, but that's the starting point. And we should merit to have a Purim Samech in spite of all the difficult situations. It's been a very tough and rough year since last Purim. I still remember last Purim when the whole thing was just beginning to unfold. And I was like, went to my son's for the Suda, and because I wasn't home, I'm home for the day. I davened early the day so I could start my drinking, by 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and get ready, the whole thing. But I was away from home, so I ended up davening a little bit later mincha, and we barely had a minyan, like 10 people, 12 people. I was just so grateful to have a minyan, and it's like Yom Kippur. It's like Yom Kippur is a day that I try to to focus on my tefillah. It's a very serious mincha on Purim. We call Yom Kippurim because Yom Kippurim. It's a day like Purim. It's a higher level, And I'm in this big, huge base medrash. Just 12 of us. We could have stood literally 50 feet away from each other if we wanted to. And I chose my spot where I'm used to davening there. And I was already in my Shemini Esrei, and some guy walks in late and decides to stand 2 rows behind me with a terrible cough, as we're talking about coronavirus. And, I'm trying to have kavana, right? I'm trying to and it's like so distracting, so disturbing. And I'm like, trying to get my thoughts together. And finally, about halfway through, right, I just realized this is funny. This is literally Purim. This is a test, right? God, you got me. You got me. You showed me up, right? You really got me. I gave a shear about, and I did that, and I go out and I talk about it, and I tell myself, and here I am in davening, and this guy's 2 rows, and I'm panicking, I'm freaking out because this guy's got all kinds of germs going my direction. I might be getting coronavirus, whatever it is. Wasn't even sure at that time, right? I just said, Eino Duvadil. I closed my mind off from the whole thing. I went back to my davening. And in the last 10, 15 minutes, I had one of the best davenings I ever had in my entire life, including Yom Kippur. Yeah, it's an opportunity, and we have to take advantage of it. Take some time, meditate, go over the material, which I will send up B'ezras Hashem with the link for the video as well. And hopefully we'll be zeicha to get to such high levels. And I'm telling you, once you do, you will know what it means. Adeloyada, bein Arahaman and Baruch Mordechai. Purim Samech.